As we speak, we have had a number of people who probably are aware that this is day two, a hearing on Article 5, a constitutional convention being debated by Idaho legislators in committee today, a House committee. They had testimony yesterday, and then they decided they would have to have more testimony today. Most of it is coming in opposed. I was going to have legislator Christy Zito on with us this morning, but she's also in committee. She'll be joining us, we would hope, tomorrow to talk about some of these issues that are currently underway. And I had an email this morning from State Representative Heather Scott who said that just the traffic, the volume of email that legislators have been receiving about this Article 5 convention has been like nothing she's ever seen before, which tells you that among constituents across Idaho, there's a great deal of interest in all of this. If you're not familiar with it, and let me just say, we have talked about it a great deal on this show over the last couple of years because it was before legislators last year and it got rejected. And then the Speaker of the House, he sent a group of people, representatives, off to Arizona, I believe it was, several months ago to take part in a mock constitutional convention. Article 5 simply comes from the Constitution of the United States. Now, if the Congress, which sits in Washington, proposes, and it can do this, propose an amendment to the Constitution, they can do that, and then it can go to the states, and the states can either ratify it or reject it, and when you get to a certain, majority, you can have change. You can have an amendment to the Constitution. We had one way back in 1991 that was added, and they'd been working on this since the 1700s, and finally, it ended up being passed when enough states got on board with it. And so these things do happen periodically. But amending the Constitution is not easy. Now, Article 5 allows the states themselves, if enough states get together and call a convention, they can then put together an amendment, and that amendment then becomes part of the U.S. Constitution. There has been, for at least the last 35 years, an effort in this country to call such a convention to pass a balanced budget amendment. We have a country right now officially $20.5 trillion in debt. $20.5 trillion. Now, a billion is 1,000 million, a trillion is 1,000 billion. We are $20.5 trillion in debt in the United States, officially. That does not count all of the unfunded liabilities, unfunded mandates, everything else that's going on around the country that we have at the state level and perhaps in local governments as well. So the amount of debt out there is just an unimaginable amount. But if we had an amendment, the belief is we could at least control the spending on a yearly basis and maybe start paying down that debt. But it's still going to be a Herculean task, obviously, if you understand what I'm talking about. However, there are people who fear that any such convention could go off the rails. And if they get together and start talking about a balanced budget amendment, what else would they talk about? Would they talk about suddenly rewriting the entire document? Because the liberals have said over the last, 50 or 60 years, it's a living, breathing document. In other words, the interpretation of it can change as the mores in this country change, which means if they had an opportunity, they would go and they would remove something like the Second Amendment, which they despise. They would start rewriting all of this and turning this into their notion of a socialist paradise. So we could all be living in a much larger version of Venezuela. Testimony yesterday. And this is what I've been arguing for a very long time on this program. And I realize my co-conspirator, we're owned by the same company. Kevin Miller at KIDO is actually behind the convention. You've heard some of his commercials on the air as he's endorsing the move. That does not mean I think Kevin is misplaced or misguided. I think he truly believes we need a balanced budget amendment. I do too. I just don't believe in this method of going about it. Here is some of the testimony from yesterday. Betsy Russell, writing at the Spokesman Review. That's a newspaper out of Spokane, but they do a good job of covering issues in the Idaho State Capitol. She writes, Walt Donovan, a retired Marine Corps brigadier general and attorney. So the guy's a lawyer. He was also a brigadier general. What do I know about Marines? They love their country. That's why they enlisted in the first place. Some got drafted, but most people who go in the Marine Corps are enlistees. At least in the modern era, they're all enlistees. And brigadier generals usually are pretty smart people. We've got a couple of generals right now. One runs the White House on a day-to-day basis. His name is Kelly. We have another one who's running the Pentagon. He seems to be a pretty sharp guy, too. So we can look at this and say, okay, on the service level, he's a lawyer, he's also a brigadier general, and he was a Marine. So he's got a lot of credibility, I would think, at least even among some liberals, he's got credibility when he speaks about this issue. He said, 62 years ago, along with others, I took an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States. I oppose this motion, and I'm authorized to speak on behalf of the VFW Post 63, who also opposes this. He went on to say a balanced budget amendment, if adopted, is a bridge. It's a process. It's not an outcome. He also said, you assume one state, one vote. Now, the other day we had a caller who said that's how it would work. Well, this is what the general has to say about this. It's overly optimistic. You assume one state, one vote. It's overly optimistic. Article 5, he said, guarantees equality of state presence. It does not guarantee equality of voting. He noted that the Electoral College is in the Constitution and grants, for example, 55 electoral votes to California and just 4 to Idaho. He said the states with power in the Electoral College would ensure that voting in any Article 5 convention will be done by Electoral College numbers. And he said, I oppose any Article 5 convention call. It really is time to take counsel of our fears. Now, do you think if you had an Article 5 convention and you had 4 votes from Idaho, and I don't know, 3 votes from Wyoming, and maybe a dozen from Utah, but you've got 55 from California, you've got 28 from New York, you've got 25 or so from New Jersey, you've got about 15 to 20 from Massachusetts. Do you really think that the red states in flyover country would have any say in the outcome of this Constitution, this redrafting or this amendment? Do you think that we would have any say in it? There's a question you need to ponder. Yes, I would like to see a balanced federal budget, but this approach is not necessarily going to guarantee us. A lot has changed. If this was taking place in 1950, you probably would have found a lot of votes for that balanced budget amendment, even in the most populous states. There's a great piece, though, today from, it's called Washington, it's a Beltway Secrets or something like that, written by Paul Bedard at the Washington Examiner. And Paul Bedard says a recent study from Gallup shows that just as recently as 2010, I know it's hard to believe, but as recently as 2010, in surveys in all 50 states, there was a slight majority in at least all 50 states. It was higher, it was a bigger majority in some, but in all 50 states, at least a majority of people who called themselves conservatives. The thing is, you look at that and you realize at the time Barack Obama had been elected president overwhelmingly, and you had Democrats who were controlling both houses of Congress for a brief period. So even though a lot of people call themselves conservatives, doesn't mean they're voting that way. However, when they went back and they looked at the same numbers, and 840,000 people were surveyed. This is not one of those surveys where they say, well, we picked 1,100 people at random across the country, and our sample size represents what America thinks. They interviewed 840,000 people. It's a huge sample size. Only the majorities now in 39 states consider themselves conservative. That means we've had a pickup of 11 states that the majority of voters now consider themselves liberal. This is why an Article 5 convention is a dangerous thing. And as Representative Scott said in her email to me this morning, they are overwhelmed that the inboxes are just filling up with reactions from people around Idaho to this. And I'm telling you right now, most of those reactions are opposed to any decision to go along with this Article 5 convention, which is heartening. Doesn't necessarily mean, though, because there are certain people in power in the legislature who actually will have a great say in what happens here. And Mr. Bedke could start dangling some other offers to some members of the House and saying, well, look, even if your constituents oppose this, the big donors, they think it's a great idea. And I'll throw you a little bit more campaign cash. I'll make sure you get that. Won't that be nice? We'll even gift wrap it for you. Or I'll give you a new and better committee assignment. You understand how the horse trading starts. So even though the public may be overwhelmingly opposed, it may have nothing to do with how people in Boise actually vote on this. So you've got to be noisy. Telephone number to reach our program today, 208-736-0300. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX at newsradio1310.com. We're at 36. It's 8:16. Caller, you're on the air.
I got two things actually on the convention. Number one is people. I hear it all the time, especially from young people, complaining about the electoral college. People don't understand that we wouldn't have a voice whatsoever without it. And I could see most Americans falling for something like that, even if they don't want it to go that way. They wouldn't have a clue because they don't understand any of it. I don't know how else to say it.
Well, because we don't teach people a lot about the Constitution. That Jim Patrick and I were talking about it at the county fair last year, and he was pointing out that we all grew up in a certain generation with civics education that doesn't exist anymore. When I was a kid, we had to learn not only the preamble, but we had to take a test at the end of the 8th grade where we matched each amendment to its number.
The bottom line, the problem is they don't even pay attention to the Constitution. Our politicians don't care about the Constitution.
Because their constituents don't. You made a good point.
They change. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Okay, I got to hang up.
All right, well, thank you. They know that they're constituents. I had a caller one time when the issue of same-sex marriage was raging across the country. And for religious grounds, I was opposed. But on the other hand, he called and he said, well, how can we allow this? Because the Constitution would be opposed to it. And I said, the Constitution says nothing about it. And he'd sworn an oath to that Constitution. And I'm telling you right now, he'd sworn an oath, but I don't know that he'd ever read it. That is the rub in all of this, is that a lot of people out there are going to be sold on this, and they're going to be told, hey, this will be a good thing if you want to control spending. And the other part of that I should point out, too, I was hearing from Jim Jordan. I was watching a TV show the other night. He's the leader of the Liberty Caucus in the U.S. House of Representatives, one of Raul Labrador's allies. They're in that caucus together. And Jordan said, yeah, tax cuts are great for people, but on the other hand, it's going to balloon the yearly deficit even more, which will add to the debt. And so we have to start seriously talking about cutting spending. Well, where are we going to cut it? General Mattis, Defense Secretary Mattis, went over to the Capitol yesterday and said, hey, stop gutting the military. Okay, so we don't want to cut the military. Well, do we stop paving roads? Well, no, we can't stop paving roads. Well, then should we cut your Social Security? Over my dead body. You got to start looking at this and realizing the gravy train doesn't always run. We have to take a short break. I'll take more of your telephone calls coming up in a short while. Trip Family Medicine coming along at 8:30. We're going to be talking about Adam Schiff getting pranked just after 9 o'clock news today. He claims it wasn't a prank, but I've listened. He didn't know what he was doing. In the meantime, I want to tell you about my friends at Even Green Solar. Even Green Technology, that's EGT Solar, the largest installer of solar panels for home and business throughout Idaho. And right now, you can get an IRS tax credit that could save you 30% of the total project cost. The solar will also add value to your home. You need to give them a call if you're interested in actually getting some details and some quotes. The telephone number is 208-293-9191, 208-293-9191, or go online, evengreentechnology.com. There are reviews there, too, from a great many customers that you can also take a look at. Call it 820. We're at telephone number for reaching the program today is 208-736-0300. We were talking about the proposed Article 5 convention. Debate continues for the second consecutive day in Boise on this matter. Quick note, if you're listening to the program, a big thank you, but I also wanted to point out you need to give a call to our friends at Mount Harrison Audiology in Rupert if you're struggling with your hearing. I'll get to my telephone callers in just a minute. Stay patient. Mount Harrison Audiology, pleased to announce that Dr. Courtney Mitchell is joining the practice. Dr. Mitchell is skilled and compassionate. He's an audiologist who brings attention to detail and also diagnostic treatment and treatment recommendations. I should say Courtney is a she. It depends on the spelling sometimes. My dad told me I almost got named that, but then they decided to go with Junior, because who wants to be original, right? So anyway, I wanted to point out, trust your hearing to Dr. Mitchell and Dr. Christine Pickup at Mount Harrison Audiology, the number 208-312-0957 to schedule your hearing health evaluation. Caller, you're up next. You're on Top Story with Bill Colley on KLIX.
Yeah, if America would just one time tell the whole world that we're broke, we can't afford to give them billions and billions and billions of dollars, and instead of us taking out a loan to give them that money, let them take out their own loan and get that money from whoever we borrow it from.
Well, I think that we've got a president at the moment who at least is taking into account the fact that for decades the American people have thought we need to actually get a handle on who we're giving our money to. I'm so sick to death of politicians saying, oh, but we need to do this. Otherwise, they'll hate us. Well, in other words, it's bribery, but they don't like us. It was Saudi Arabians who were actually on those flights who came here in September 11th on 2001. We've got to remember that. We've got to sit back and say, if we can't take care of our own people and we've got to deal with our debt, we've got to tell the rest of the world, sorry, even if we like you, we can't do it any longer. Caller, you're up next. You're on the air on Top Story. Go ahead.
Good morning, Bill. Well, one of the things the Conference of States has been really misleading our legislative people and around the country is that once there are 34 states, and they only need 6 more, and that's why they're pushing in Idaho and other states, that it's Congress will call the Constitutional Convention. The states will have no power. Once the states, bring about the call for a convention, but after that point, it's in the hands of Congress, and they can dictate the terms. And so there's nothing written in the Constitution about who the delegates will be and so forth. So it could be extremely wide open.
Right. The word, I think, would be delineated that they would use. It is not outlined in any way, and that's what the general was saying in his testimony yesterday. We're only making assumptions, and those assumptions could be wrong.
Everything's assumptions. And the father of the Constitution, James Madison, or he's considered, along with Alexander Hamilton, both, they had to make a compromise to get that Article 5, that provision in the Constitution. They did not want it. And this is what they said. Madison trembled at the prospect of an Article 5 convention, and Hamilton dreaded one. And future Chief Justice John Jay said another convention would be an extravagant risk. And of course, we got people that we have to realize the left wants to get there. George Soros wants a Marxist constitution, and it's already been drafted. It's called the New States Constitution. And it, of course, will set up a dictatorship, and they will ratify it by a simple majority through a national referendum. In other words, the popular vote. And then in that case, Hillary won the election. So, Bill, this is the thing. We're throwing the Constitution out to the wolves.
Absolutely.
That's where we're at.
Hey, thank you much for the call. And hearing Soros has a house here in Idaho yesterday was frightening. That guy's been around so long. He must have cut some sort of deal with the devil. You're up next. You're on Top Story on KLIX with Bill Colley. Go ahead.
Good morning, Bill. Good topic. To me, it's just full of uncertainty. I mean, we can wake up and our Constitution be totally different than when we went to bed. And we're putting it in the hands of the politicians who have proven that they're not doing what's best for the country to begin with. And the frustrating part is I understand if people want to push for it. The frustrating thing is we have two parties that aren't serious about debt. That's one reason I was against these tax overhaul. And, I agree with the president. We need to do that. But if we're really serious about getting out of debt, you cut expenses and raise revenue. And we're not willing to do that because we don't want to let go of our little precious entitlements. And it's ridiculous. As long as you have politicians who do it to pad their own power in their own pockets at the expense of this country, we are never going to be in better pictures economically. It's not going to happen.
And thank you for the call. And the younger people have really become much more Europeanized in the fact that they believe government should be mommy and daddy. 827, you're up next. You're on the air on Top Story.
Hi, an interesting aspect of the Article 5 Convention of States is none has ever been successfully called, but many times it has been tried. And when it comes close, what ends up happening is the Congress will pass what the Convention of States wanted to get passed, so the Convention of States wouldn't get called. So as a strategy, just attempting to call a convention of states many times gets done what you want to get done.
It does, but this one's been around for a long time, and Congress is just snoozing through it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's something that we should also be worried about. Is a lot of people in Washington definitely would like to see this take place because we've plenty of evidence. The deep state is in control, and the deep state sees this as a wonderful opportunity once and for all to close the gate around the rest of us in the pen. I've got about a minute to go, so I'll squeeze one last caller in here for about 60 seconds. Caller, you're up next. You're on the air.
How about 10 seconds? Here's what you tell them. You say you're playing with marbles on a slanted table and we're always losing. Imagine that. You tell these politicians, no dinero. That's it.
Do not cooperate. How are they going to put us all in jail, right?
Where are they going to put us all? They'll stack us in there so high, and after 2 weeks, they'll throw us out and say, go home and do something important. Make some money.
Thanks for the call. It reminds me of one time when my dad was angry with me, and he told me, you're grounded for 2 weeks. And after the third day of seeing me around the house bothering him, he said, get out of here. All right, thanks. I'll see you later. We wanted to point out a couple of quick notes before we wrap up this half hour. Dr. Tripp's scheduled to be with us in just a matter of a few minutes. One of my coworkers just sent a note along. The Wendell Snack Bar is for sale. I've been there to eat before, and it's a great place and inexpensive, too. I hope somebody picks that up and continues that great tradition. I also wanted to mention very quickly, too, if I could as well, warmer weather tomorrow into the 60s, but then cooling down over the weekend. If you're struggling with heating your home, you've got to call the pros at Ramsey Heating and Electric. They'll come out and they'll get the job done, and they'll get it done right the first time. Problem-free, cozy winters are found at Ramsey Heating and Electric, 2600 Overland Avenue in Burley. The telephone number, 208-678-0459. Ramsey Heating and Electric, where they sell warm winters and cool summers.